The warning alarm screamed through the corridors of the starship Meridian. Red lights flashed as the ship shook violently. Jake Morrison grabbed onto the nearest wall rail as the floor tilted under his feet. He had been a diplomat for 12 years, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. "All passengers to escape pods immediately," the ship's computer announced in multiple languages. Jake ran down the hallway, his heart pounding in his chest. Behind him, he could hear the alien crew members making their own urgent sounds of distress. The Meridian was carrying 4 beings from different worlds to an important peace meeting. Jake represented Earth. Ambassador Kethver came from the crystal planet Zephyr, his tall body made of what looked like living glass that glowed with soft, blue light. Engineer Blunall was from the Waterworld Aquaria, with smooth green skin and gills that opened and closed along his neck. Pilot Zixara belonged to the insect-like Volturans, with 4 arms and large compound eyes that reflected light like mirrors. They had been traveling together for 3 days when the engines failed. Now they were falling toward an unknown planet. Jake reached the escape pod bay just as another explosion rocked the ship. Kethver was already there, his crystal skin flickering with worry. Blunall came running in next, his webbed feet slapping against the metal floor. Zixara flew in using her wing membranes, clicking rapidly in her native language. "The planet below us is called Verdania Prime," Kethver said, his voice ringing like distant bells. "Our records show it is dangerous for most life forms." "How dangerous?" Jake asked, helping Blunall into the escape pod. "The plants contain chemicals that can kill 17 different species." Zixara buzzed, her translator making her words sound mechanical. "No one has ever survived eating anything." There, the escape pod launched with a violent jerk. Through the small window, Jake watched the Meridian break apart in the atmosphere above them. Pieces of the great ship burned up like falling stars. Their pod spun as it fell through the clouds toward the green world below. The landing was hard. Jake felt his teeth rattle as they hit the ground and bounced twice before coming to a stop. When the pod door opened, warm air rushed in. It smelled like flowers and earth, reminding Jake of spring back on Earth. They climbed out onto a world that looked almost too beautiful to be dangerous. Tall trees with purple bark reached toward a pink sky. Flowers and colors Jake had never seen grew everywhere. Strange fruits hung from low branches. The air was clean and fresh. "It looks safe," Blunall said, his gills fluttering as he breathed the alien air. "Looks can lie," Kethver warned. His crystal body had stopped glowing as brightly. "We must be very careful." They found the emergency supply box in the wreckage of their pod. Jake's heart sank when they opened it. There were only 5 days' worth of food packs, and the crash had damaged most of them. What remained would barely keep the 3 aliens alive. "The food must go to you 3, Jake said without hesitation. "Your bodies need the special nutrients more than mine does." This was true. The aliens ate specially made food that their bodies required to stay healthy. Jake, being human, could eat many different things, at least that was the theory. "But what will you eat?" Blunall asked, his large eyes showing concern. Jake looked around at all the plants surrounding them. Everything looked green and healthy. Some of the fruits smelled sweet. Others reminded him of vegetables from Earth, but he remembered Zixara's warning about the deadly chemicals. "I will figure something out," he said. That first night, they made camp under a tree with leaves as big as umbrellas. The aliens carefully shared 1 food pack among the 3 of them. Jake watched them eat and tried not to think about his empty stomach. When the others fell asleep, Jake used his flashlight to examine the plants around their camp. He found berries that looked like blueberries from Earth. There were roots that seemed similar to carrots. Some leaves looked like the spinach his mother used to grow in her garden. Jake remembered his grandfather, who had taught him about wild plants during camping trips. The old man had shown him which mushrooms were safe and which ones would make him sick. He had explained how to test unknown plants by trying tiny amounts first. "The difference between food and poison is often just the amount," his grandfather had said. Jake picked 1 small berry and looked at it closely. It was purple instead of blue, but it felt the same as earth berries. He touched it to his lip and waited. Nothing happened. He touched it to his tongue. It tasted sweet and familiar. He did not eat it yet. Instead, he picked several different plants and put them in his backpack. Tomorrow he would start testing them properly. His human body might be able to handle what would kill his alien friends. The next morning, Kethver found Jake examining his collection of plants. "You should not touch those," the crystal being said, his body flashing with alarm. "Our scanners show they contain alkaloids and toxins." "Maybe," Jake said calmly. "But humans evolved eating wild plants for millions of years. We might be different." Zixara flew over to look at what Jake had gathered. Her compound eyes focused on each plant. The computer records show these chemicals killed test subjects from Rigel and Centauri worlds. "I am not from those worlds," Jake replied. He picked up the purple berry he had tested the night before. Sometimes the old ways work better than new technology. Before any of them could stop him, Jake bit the berry in half and swallowed it. The aliens stared at him in shock. Bluenol made a gurgling sound of distress. "You will die," Kethver said, his crystal form dimming with sadness. Jake waited. His stomach felt fine. The berry had tasted good, like a mix of grape and apple. After an hour, he still felt normal. His alien friends watched him carefully, expecting him to fall over at any moment, but Jake remained healthy. He even felt a little bit of energy from the natural sugars in the fruit. "My species learned to eat almost anything to survive," he explained. "Our stomachs make very strong acid. Our livers can clean many poisons from our blood. What kills you might just give me a stomachache." As the day went on, Jake continued his careful testing. He tried tiny pieces of different plants, waiting between each test to see how his body reacted. The aliens watched in amazement as their human companion consumed things that their computers said were deadly. By evening, Jake had identified 3 plants that seemed completely safe for him to eat. The aliens had shared another food pack, leaving them with only 3 days of supplies remaining. That night, as Jake chewed on a root that tasted like sweet potato, he realized something important. His friends were not just worried about the poisonous plants. They were scared because their advanced civilizations had made them forget how to survive in the wild. Humans had never forgotten. Even in the space age, people still went camping and fishing and hunting. They still grew gardens and cooked over fires. Jake had thought these were just fun activities, but now he understood they were actually training for survival. The aliens slept fitfully that second night, their bodies already feeling the effects of reduced food. Jake, however, slept well with his stomach full of alien plants that somehow tasted like home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But for the first time since the crash, Jake felt hopeful. His human nature, which had always seemed primitive, compared to his alien friends' advanced abilities, might actually be the key to keeping them all alive. The second day on Verdania Prime started with bad news. Kethera's crystal body was no longer glowing as brightly as before. The blue light inside him had become dim and weak. He moved more slowly than usual, and his bell-like voice sounded tired. Bluenol was having problems too. His green skin had turned a pale gray color. The gills on his neck opened and closed faster than normal, like he was having trouble breathing. When he tried to walk, his webbed feet dragged on the ground. Zixara was the worst of all. Her compound eyes had lost their shine. Her forearms trembled when she tried to lift anything. She could barely fly anymore, and when she tried to speak, her translator made crackling sounds. Jake watched his friends with growing worry. They were starving, and it was only the second day. "We need to make the food last longer," Kethver said as they gathered around the remaining supply packs. "Each of us should eat only half portions from now on." "That will make you even weaker," Jake said. "You should eat normal amounts. I can find my own food." "The plants here are poison," Zixara buzzed weakly. "You cannot keep eating them. You will die," but Jake felt fine. In fact, he felt better than he had in months. The wild plants seemed to give him more energy than the processed food he usually ate on spaceships. His stomach was strong. and his body felt healthy and alert. While his friends divided their small breakfast, Jake walked around their camp looking for more plants to try. He found a patch of leaves that looked like lettuce from Earth. They were bigger and had a slightly different color, but they smelled fresh and clean. Jake picked a few leaves and examined them carefully. His grandfather had taught him to look for signs that plants might be dangerous. These leaves had no strange spots or unusual colors. They did not smell bitter or sharp. He tore off a tiny piece and placed it on his tongue. It tasted mild and slightly sweet. He waited 10 minutes, then ate a larger piece. His mouth and throat felt normal. After another 20 minutes, he ate a whole leaf. "Stop that immediately," Kethver called out. The crystal alien had been watching Jake from across the camp. "Our scanners detect high levels of compounds that damage nervous systems." "Your scanners are made for your species," Jake replied, "not for humans." Jake continued eating the leaves. They tasted good and made his stomach feel satisfied. To prove his point, he ate several more while his alien friends watched in horror. An hour passed. Jake felt perfectly fine. He had more energy than before and his mind was clear and sharp. The aliens could not understand how this was possible. "Your biology is very different from ours," Blue Unnel said, his voice weak with hunger. "But the chemicals should still be dangerous." Jake sat down next to his friends and tried to explain. "Humans evolved on a world full of plants that could hurt us. Over millions of years, our bodies learned to handle many different chemicals. Our stomachs make acid that is much stronger than yours. Our livers can clean poisons from our blood very quickly." He pointed to a red fruit hanging from a nearby tree. "That fruit might kill you because your body was never designed to handle its chemicals. But my body has systems that can break down those same chemicals and make them harmless." Zixara looked at the fruit with her dim compound eyes. "How do you know which plants are safe and which are dangerous?" "I test them very carefully," Jake explained. "First, I look at them closely. Then I smell them. If they seem okay, I touch them to my skin, then to my lips, then to my tongue. I try tiny amounts first and wait to see what happens. If I feel sick, I stop. If I feel fine, I try a little more." The aliens found this method terrifying. In their advanced civilizations, food was always perfectly safe and carefully prepared. The idea of eating something that might be poisonous seemed impossible to them, but Jake had grown up hearing stories from his grandfather about surviving in the wilderness. Humans had always lived this way. Even in modern times, people still went camping and learned which wild plants were safe to eat. What seemed dangerous to the aliens was natural to humans. By midday, Jake had found several new plants that his body could handle safely. There were nuts that tasted like almonds after he cracked them open. He found roots that were sweet and crunchy when he dug them up and washed them in the stream. Some bark from certain trees could be chewed like gum and gave him energy. The most important discovery was a type of grass seed that grew in thick patches near the water. Jake gathered handfuls of the seeds and found they tasted nutty and filling. They reminded him of wild rice that grew in lakes back on Earth. While Jake ate his foraged meal, his alien friends shared another small portion of their emergency food. They were now down to 3 packs total. At their current rate, the food would be gone in 3 more days. "I wish we could eat what you eat," Blueno said sadly, watching Jake chew on the grass seeds. "Your bodies are not made for it," Jake replied. "Your species became very good at processing perfect food, but you lost the ability to handle rough food like this." Kethvera's crystal body flickered weakly. "Our ancestors ate natural food long ago, but we evolved beyond the need for such primitive methods." "Maybe you evolved too far," Jake said gently. "Sometimes the old ways are better than the new ways." That afternoon, Jake decided to try something new. He had noticed that some of the aliens' emergency food had a chemical smell that reminded him of medicines. He wondered if the plants on this world might have similar chemicals that could help his friends. He found a tree with smooth gray bark that smelled slightly medicinal. Jake carefully scraped off a small piece of bark and examined it. It looked and smelled like willow bark from Earth, which people had used for thousands of years to reduce pain and fever. Jake made a small fire using dry wood and dead leaves. He boiled some water in a metal cup from their survival kit and added tiny pieces of the bark. The water turned light brown and smelled like tea. "What are you doing?" Zixara asked, crawling over to watch. "Making medicine," Jake said. "This bark might help with pain and make you feel stronger." The aliens were afraid to try it, but Jake drank some of the bark tea first to show it was safe. It tasted bitter but not unpleasant. After waiting an hour to make sure he felt fine, he offered some to his friends. "If it does not hurt Jake, maybe it will not hurt us," Bluenil said hopefully. Each alien tried just a few drops of the tea. They waited nervously, expecting to feel sick or poisoned, but nothing bad happened. In fact, Kethver's crystal body began to glow a little brighter. Bluenil's skin looked less gray. Zixara's eyes seemed clearer. The bark tea did not provide nutrition, but it seemed to help their bodies feel less weak and tired. It was not a solution to their hunger problem, but it gave them hope. As the sun set on their second day, Jake realized something important about the situation. His alien friends were not just physically different from humans. Their whole way of thinking about survival was different. They had been taught that nature was dangerous and that technology would always protect them. They trusted their computers and scanners more than their own senses. When their technology said something was poisonous, they would never even consider trying it, but humans had learned to trust their bodies and their instincts. They knew that nature could be dangerous, but they also knew it could provide what they needed to survive. Jake's ancestors had lived through ice ages and droughts and famines by learning to eat whatever they could find. Now, on this alien world, those ancient human skills were keeping him alive while his technologically advanced friends slowly starved. That night, Jake slept well on his full stomach while his alien companions tossed and turned with hunger. Tomorrow would be even harder for them, but Jake was beginning to form a plan that might save them all. On the third morning, Jake woke up to find Kethver lying motionless on the ground. For a terrifying moment, he thought his crystal friend had died during the night. But when Jake touched the alien's shoulder, a faint blue glow flickered inside the crystal body. "Kethver, can you hear me?" Jake asked softly. The crystal alien's eyes opened slowly. They were dim and cloudy, like old glass. "I am very weak," Kethver whispered. His voice no longer rang like bells. Instead, it sounded like wind blowing through broken stones. Bluenil was sitting by the stream, but he was not moving. His green skin had turned almost white, and his gills barely moved. When Jake approached him, the aquatic alien looked up with tired eyes. "I cannot feel my feet," Bluenil said. "My body is shutting down." Zixara was the worst of all. The insect-like alien lay curled up under a large leaf, her forearms wrapped around her body. Her compound eyes were completely dull, and her wings hung limp and useless. She could no longer speak, only make small clicking sounds. Jake felt his heart breaking as he looked at his friends. They were dying. And there were still 2 days left before the rescue ships might arrive. The emergency food packs were almost empty. There was barely enough left for one more day, and even that would only be tiny portions. Jake knew that his friends would not survive much longer without real food, but Jake felt strong and healthy. The wild plants had given him plenty of energy, and he had even gained some weight since the crash. His human body was thriving on the natural food that was slowly killing his companions through starvation. "I have to find a way to help them," Jake said to himself as he gathered his collection of plants and tools. He had been thinking about this problem all night. The aliens could not eat the raw plants that kept him alive, but maybe he could change the plants somehow. His grandfather had taught him that cooking food could make it safer and easier to digest. Jake built a bigger fire than usual and gathered stones to make a cooking area. He filled several metal containers with water and began experimenting with different ways to prepare the plants he had found. First, he tried boiling some of the sweet roots he had been eating. The hot water turned brown as chemicals from the roots dissolved into it. Jake let the mixture cool and then tasted it carefully. It was like a sweet soup, but much milder than eating the raw roots. Next, He took some of the grass seeds and ground them between two rocks until they became a rough flour. He mixed this flour with water and cooked it over the fire, stirring constantly. The result was a thick porridge that smelled nutty and pleasant. The most important experiment was with the berries he had been eating. Jake crushed them and boiled them for a long time, then strained out all the solid pieces. What remained was a dark purple liquid that tasted sweet and fruity. "What are you doing?" Kethver asked weakly. He had managed to crawl closer to watch Jake work. "I am trying to make food that your bodies can handle," Jake explained. "Cooking changes the chemicals in plants. It might make them safe for you to eat." Jake knew this was dangerous. Even cooked, these plants might still poison his friends, but doing nothing would definitely kill them. Sometimes the only choice was to take a risk. He started with the smallest possible test. Jake dipped his finger in the berry juice and touched it to Kethver's crystal lips. The alien's body absorbed the tiny amount of liquid, and they waited to see what would happen. 10 minutes passed. Kethver did not get worse. In fact, his crystal body seemed to flicker with slightly more light than before. "How do you feel?" Jake asked. "Not worse," Kethver said slowly. "Maybe a little better." Encouraged, Jake gave Kethver a few more drops of the berry juice. Again, they waited. Again, nothing bad happened. The crystal alien's glow became a little brighter. Jake tried the same test with Bluenol, touching just a tiny drop of the cooked root soup to the aquatic alien's lips. Bluenol's gills fluttered, but not in a bad way. The gray color of his skin seemed to become slightly less pale. Zixara was too weak to respond, but Jake managed to get a single drop of the diluted berry juice into her mouth. Her compound eyes focused for a moment, and she made a soft clicking sound that seemed hopeful rather than distressed. Over the next several hours, Jake slowly increased the amounts he gave to his friends. He watched them carefully for any signs of poisoning, but instead he saw signs of improvement. The cooking process had somehow made the plants safer for alien digestion. By afternoon, Jake had figured out why his cooking method worked. The heat and water broke down the chemicals that were most dangerous to his friends, while leaving behind the nutrients their bodies needed. It was like turning poison into medicine through careful preparation. "My people used to do this thousands of years ago," Jake explained as he stirred another batch of root soup. "Before we had grocery stores and restaurants, humans had to learn how to make wild food safe to eat." Kethver was now able to sit up and speak more clearly. "We forgot these skills when we developed synthetic food production. Our ancestors once knew how to prepare natural food, but that knowledge was lost." "Not lost," Jake said, "just forgotten. Humans never stopped learning about wild food because we never completely gave up our connection to nature." Jake's biggest discovery came when he found a grove of mushrooms growing on dead tree trunks. These mushrooms looked similar to ones he had seen in earth forests, but they were much larger and had a silver color instead of brown. Mushrooms were tricky. Some were perfectly safe to eat, while others could kill you with just a small bite. Jake examined these alien mushrooms very carefully. They smelled earthy and pleasant, with no sharp or bitter odors. When he cut one open, the inside was white and firm, just like edible mushrooms from Earth. Jake cooked a tiny piece of mushroom for a very long time, boiling it until it was completely soft. He ate it himself first and waited 2 hours to make sure it was safe. When he felt no ill effects, he prepared more mushrooms and offered them to his friends. The cooked mushrooms were the most successful food yet. All three aliens were able to eat small portions without any problems. The mushrooms seemed to provide exactly the kind of nutrition their bodies needed most. "These taste like the food we ate on our homeworlds long ago," Bluenol said, his voice growing stronger. "Before we learned to make artificial food." Jake realized something important as he watched his friends slowly recover their strength. The aliens were not just physically different from humans. Their entire civilizations had evolved in a different direction. Humans had developed amazing technology, but they had never completely abandoned their primitive survival skills. Even in the space age, humans still hunted and fished and grew gardens. They still learned to cook over fires and identify edible plants. The aliens had focused entirely on perfecting their technology. They had created perfect foods and perfect environments, but in doing so, they had lost touch with the natural world. When their technology failed, they had no backup plan. "Your species kept the old knowledge alive," Zixara said, her voice growing clearer as the nutrients from Jake's cooking began to restore her strength. "You never forgot how to survive without machines." "We thought it was just for fun," Jake admitted. "Camping and fishing and cooking over fires. We called it recreation, but it was really training." As the sun set on the third day, Jake looked at his friends with hope for the first time since the crash. They were still weak, but they were no longer dying. His human knowledge of food preparation had saved their lives. More importantly, Jake had learned something about himself and his species. Humans were not primitive compared to other civilizations. They were adaptable, they were survivors, and sometimes the old ways were exactly what the galaxy needed. The fourth day brought both hope and fear. Jake's alien friends were alive and stronger than they had been the day before, but they were still very weak. The emergency food packs were completely empty now. Everything depended on Jake's ability to find and prepare safe food from the alien plants. Kethver could sit up and talk, but his crystal body was still dim. Bluno could walk short distances, but his skin remained pale gray instead of healthy green. Zixara was the most improved. She could fly for a few minutes at a time, and her compound eyes had regained some of their shine. "The rescue ships will arrive tomorrow," Zixara said, checking the emergency beacon. "We just need to survive one more day." Jake nodded, but he knew one more day could be the hardest yet. His friends needed more nutrition than the small amounts of cooked plants he had been able to give them. He had to find something better, something that would give them real strength. Early that morning, Jake decided to explore farther from their camp. He had been staying close to his friends, but now he needed to search for new types of food. He walked along the stream that provided their water, looking for plants he had not tried before. About a mile from camp, Jake found something extraordinary. A grove of trees unlike any he had seen on this planet. These trees had smooth, white bark and hung heavy with what looked like nuts. But when Jake examined them closely, he realized they were not nuts at all. The tree pods contained a thick, sticky liquid that smelled sweet and familiar. Jake carefully cracked one open and found that the liquid inside looked exactly like tree sap from maple trees on Earth. His grandfather had taught him how to collect maple sap and boil it down to make syrup. Jake tasted a tiny drop of the alien tree sap. It was sweet and energizing like pure sugar water. More importantly, it did not have the bitter or sharp taste that usually meant dangerous chemicals. This was exactly what his friends needed, concentrated energy in a form their bodies might be able to handle. He gathered as many pods as he could carry and hurried back to camp. His friends watched hopefully as Jake built up the fire and began the long process of cooking the tree sap. "What is that?" Bluno asked, his gills fluttering with interest at the sweet smell. "Energy," Jake said simply. "Pure energy that your bodies can use." Jake boiled the tree sap for hours, stirring it constantly to prevent it from burning. As the water evaporated, the sap became thicker and more concentrated. The smell grew stronger and sweeter, filling the air around their camp. When Jake finally finished, he had a small pot of golden syrup that looked and smelled like the maple syrup his grandmother used to make. He let it cool, then carefully tested it himself. The syrup was incredibly sweet and gave him an immediate burst of energy. "This might save you," Jake told his friends. "But we have to be very careful. Too much sugar can be dangerous if your bodies are not used to it." Jake gave each alien just one small spoonful of the syrup, mixed with water to make it less concentrated. Then they waited to see what would happen. The results were amazing. Within an hour, Kethver's crystal body began to glow brighter than it had since the crash. The blue light inside him pulsed with new strength. Luna's skin started to turn from gray back to its normal green color. Zixara's wings straightened out and began to buzz with renewed energy. "I feel like myself again," Kethver said, his voice ringing clearly for the first time in days. "The sugar is exactly what our bodies needed. Blue and Owl agreed, standing up and walking without difficulty. But Jake was not finished. While his friends recovered from the tree syrup, he continued exploring and experimenting. He found more types of mushrooms and learned to identify which ones were safe by their smell and texture. He discovered root vegetables that became sweet and nutritious when baked in the coals of his fire. The most important discovery came when Jake found a patch of what looked like wild grain growing near a sunny clearing. The grain heads were full of seeds that looked like wheat from earth. Jake gathered armloads of the grain and brought it back to camp. Using flat rocks, Jake ground the grain seeds into a rough flour. He mixed the flour with water and tree syrup to make a simple bread dough. Then he wrapped the dough in large leaves and buried it in the hot coals of his fire to bake. When the bread was done, it smelled like fresh-baked rolls from a bakery on Earth. Jake broke it into pieces and shared it with his friends. The bread was dense and nutty, but it was real food, the kind of solid nutrition that could keep them alive for days if necessary. "This is incredible," Zixara said, eating her piece of bread slowly to make it last. "How do you know how to do all these things?" Jake thought about her question as he watched his friends eat. "Humans never forgot how to live without machines," he said finally. "Even when we developed advanced technology, we kept learning the old skills." He explained how human children still learned to camp and fish and hunt, how people still grew gardens and cooked over open fires for fun, how families passed down recipes and techniques that had been used for thousands of years. "We thought it was just entertainment," Jake continued. "But really, it was training. Training for situations exactly like this one." Kethfer's crystal body was now glowing almost as brightly as when they first met. "Our civilizations became so advanced that we forgot we were still biological beings. We thought technology could replace all natural processes." "Technology is wonderful," Jake agreed. "But it should add to natural abilities, not replace them completely. Humans learned to use both together." As the day went on, Jake continued to perfect his food preparation techniques. He learned that some plants became more nutritious when fermented, like the pickled vegetables his grandmother used to make. He discovered that certain leaves could be dried and ground up to make seasonings that helped his friends digest the alien plants more easily. By evening, Jake had created what looked like a real meal. There was bread made from wild grain, soup made from roots and mushrooms, sweet syrup from tree sap, and even a type of tea made from dried leaves that helped with digestion. His alien friends ate more that evening than they had eaten since the crash. For the first time in days, they went to sleep with full stomachs and renewed hope. "You saved our lives," Blunell said as they settled down for the night. "We saved each other," Jake replied. "I could not have survived the crash without your help repairing the emergency beacon and finding safe water. You could not have survived without my knowledge of food preparation. We needed all of our different abilities." But privately, Jake knew something had changed during their time on Verdania Prime. His alien friends had learned to respect human abilities that they had previously considered primitive. And Jake had learned that being human meant more than just having advanced technology. Humans were survivors. They were adapters. They could take the worst situation and find a way to not just survive, but to thrive. These were not primitive traits. They were the most advanced survival skills in the galaxy. As Jake fell asleep under the alien stars, he could hear the distant sound of engines in the sky. The rescue ships were coming, just as promised. Tomorrow they would be safe. But Jake knew that this experience had taught him something important about what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of advanced civilizations. Sometimes the most sophisticated technology was knowing how to live without any technology at all. The rescue ships arrived at dawn on the 5th day, their engines roaring through the pink sky of Verdania Prime. Jake watched 3 sleek vessels land in the clearing near their camp, sending clouds of dust and alien pollen swirling through the air. The rescue team that emerged from the ships was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. There were tall, thin beings with silver skin from the Altair system. Short, furry creatures with 6 legs came from the mining colonies of Proxima. Even a few gas-breathing entities floated in special atmospheric suits. The team leader was a Rigelian named Commander Vex. whose blue-scaled skin reflected the morning light. He approached their camp expecting to find desperate survivors clinging to life after 5 days on a death world. Instead, he found something completely unexpected. Jake was sitting by a cooking fire, calmly preparing breakfast from wild plants. The smell of fresh bread and sweet syrup filled the air. His 3 alien companions were not only alive, but they looked healthier than most crash survivors Vex had ever rescued. Kethver's crystal body glowed with bright blue light. Bluenal's skin was its normal healthy green color. Zixara was flying in small circles above the camp, her wings buzzing with energy. "I do not understand," Commander Vex said, his translator making his confusion clear. "Our records show that Verdania Prime is deadly to all known species. How are you still alive?" "We had help," Kethver said, gesturing toward Jake with one crystalline arm. "Our human companion kept us alive using skills we had forgotten existed." Commander Vex looked at Jake with surprise. The human was clearly the healthiest of all the survivors. His skin was tanned from working in the sun, and his eyes were bright and alert. He looked like someone who had been on vacation, not someone who had survived a deadly crash. "What did you eat?" one of the silver-skinned Altarians asked. "Our databases show that every plant on this world contains lethal toxins." Jake smiled and gestured to his collection of prepared foods. "I ate the same plants that are in your database. I just prepared them differently." The rescue team gathered around Jake's cooking area, staring in amazement at the bread, soup, syrup, and dried fruits he had prepared. Everything looked and smelled delicious, but their instruments still showed the presence of chemicals that should have been deadly. "The cooking process changes the molecular structure of the toxins," Jake explained in simple terms. "Heat and fermentation break down the dangerous compounds while leaving the nutrients intact. It is an old technique that humans have used for thousands of years." Dr. Wren, a scientific advisor on the rescue team, began scanning Jake's prepared foods with advanced instruments. "This is impossible," she muttered. "These readings show that the toxicity levels have been reduced by 90%. "How did you know this would work?" "I did not know for certain," Jake admitted. "But my grandfather taught me that almost any plant can be made safe if you prepare it correctly. Sometimes you have to boil it for hours. Sometimes you have to ferment it for days. Sometimes you have to remove certain parts and only eat others." Jake showed them his collection of notes, written on pieces of bark with charcoal from his fire. He had documented which plants were safe, which required special preparation, and which parts of each plant could be eaten. It was like a survival manual written in the most basic way possible. "Your species maintained this knowledge even after developing space travel," Commander Vex observed. "Most civilizations abandon such primitive skills once they develop synthetic food production." "We never thought of them as primitive," Jake said. "We called them traditional skills or sometimes just hobbies. People still learn them for fun or to connect with their history. We never imagined they might save our lives someday." The rescue team spent the morning documenting everything Jake had discovered. They took samples of his prepared foods and recorded detailed notes about his cooking methods. Dr. Wren was particularly interested in the fermentation techniques Jake had developed. "These methods could revolutionize how we approach survival situations," she said excitedly. "Most species would starve on worlds that humans could survive on easily." As they prepared to leave Verdania Prime, Kethver approached Commander Vex with a formal request. "I want to recommend that humans be included in all future exploration missions," the Crystal Ambassador said. "Their survival abilities are unlike anything we have seen in the galactic community." "I agree," Blueno added. "Our civilizations have become too dependent on technology. We forgot that we are still biological beings who need to eat and drink and breathe. Humans never forgot these basic truths." Zixara flew over to join the conversation. "Jake did more than just keep us alive. He taught us that there is wisdom in old knowledge. Our ancestors once knew these skills too, but we lost them when we thought technology made them unnecessary." Commander Vex was already thinking about the implications. If humans can survive on worlds that we consider uninhabitable, they could help us explore and colonize planets that we have written off as too dangerous. The flight back to the space station gave Jake time to think about what had happened. When they first crashed, he had felt like the least important member of their group. His alien friends had advanced technology, superior intelligence, and centuries more experience with space travel, but when their technology failed, those advantages became weaknesses. Their specialized diets made them vulnerable to starvation. Their dependence on processed food left them helpless when faced with natural plants. Their trust in computer databases blinded them to possibilities that their own senses might have detected. Jake's primitive human traits had turned out to be advanced survival technology. His ability to eat almost anything, his willingness to take controlled risks, and his knowledge of traditional food preparation had saved all their lives. At the space station, word of their survival spread quickly through the galactic community. Scientists wanted to study Jake's techniques. Military leaders wanted to understand human survival capabilities. Diplomats wanted to discuss how humans could contribute to exploration missions, but the most important conversation came from Admiral Korvax, the head of the Galactic Exploration Council. He met with Jake privately in his office overlooking the stars. "We have been approaching exploration all wrong," the Admiral said. "We send our most advanced ships with our most sophisticated technology, but we forget that exploration means going to places where that technology might fail. Humans seem to thrive in those situations," Jake replied. "Not because we are more advanced, but because we stayed connected to our basic survival instincts." Admiral Korvax nodded thoughtfully. "I want to propose a new policy. Every exploration mission should include at least one human crew member. Not as a backup plan, but as a primary resource for survival situations." "I would be honored to help," Jake said. "More than that," the Admiral continued, "I want you to establish a training program. Teach other species the survival skills that saved your lives on Verdania Prime. Share the knowledge that your people have preserved." Jake smiled as he looked out at the stars. A few days ago, he had felt like the most primitive being in the galaxy. Now he was being asked to teach advanced civilizations how to survive. The irony was not lost on him. In a galaxy full of incredible technology and advanced intelligence, the most valuable skill was knowing how to live without any of it. 6 months later, Jake returned to Earth as a hero. But more importantly, he returned as a teacher. The Galactic Survival Institute that he established became the most important school in known space, where beings from hundreds of worlds learned the ancient human arts of foraging, cooking, and adapting. And in the deepest wilderness areas of dozens of planets, human survival instructors taught alien explorers the most advanced technology in the galaxy. The knowledge of how to stay alive using nothing but what nature provided. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the oldest solutions were the best solutions, and that humanity's greatest strength was never forgetting how to be human.